At a basketball court, there's a pair of brothers named Kenny and his older brother, Anthony, who are playing a basketball game with their team. Coached by their father, they try to defeat the opposing team. When time is about to run out with them losing by 1 point to the opposing team, Kenny trusts Anthony to shoot the ball into the net, but unfortunately, he fails to make the shot, and in the end, Kenny's team loses. 10 years later, Kenny and Anthony are in college and have joined a professional basketball team called the Huskies and compete in basketball league games. In one game, their mother comes to support them by bringing a poster that says A and K, which means Anthony and Kenny, so they become more motivated to win the game. After winning the game, they approach their mother, and since their father has passed away, their mother feels that their father would be proud to see both of them growing up. Sometime later, Kenny and his basketball friends hang out at a bar, where he sees a beautiful girl named RC. But suddenly he is startled by his friend, causing his drink to spill until the drink flows towards RC, and finally her bag gets wet. Feeling guilty, Kenny approaches RC to apologize and starts to learn that she is a reporter who likes to write news about basketball games in the newspaper. One day in a game, Kenny passes the ball to Anthony for him to shoot. But after he successfully shoots the ball directly into the net, something goes wrong with him, causing him to fall from the net, and finally, his head hits the floor. As a result, Anthony gets injured, and the doctor calls for an ambulance to come. So Kenny wants to accompany him to the hospital. But Anthony says no need, because Kenny and the others have to continue the game until they win. Accompanied by an assistant coach in the ambulance, he learns that Anthony's heartbeat has stopped, so the ambulance staff quickly tries to save Anthony. This makes Kenny and the others lose focus when playing, so in the end, they lose, and Kenny immediately rushes to change clothes to go to the hospital. But before he can leave, his coach comes to tell him very sad news, which turns out to be that Anthony has died on the way to the hospital because of his weakened heart. The ambulance staff don't know what caused his heart to weaken, but Kenny still doesn't believe it and still wants to go see his brother. But his friends stop him and ask Kenny to let his brother go, and finally he is hugged by his friends. As a form of respect, a banner with Anthony's jersey is raised at the basketball stadium near Kenny's campus, along with other players who have also passed away. As a result, Kenny's team experiences a decline in performance and often loses, so they're commented on as having a hard time winning without the presence of Anthony. Sometime later, Kenny is still having a hard time moving on from his brother's death, so he goes to the basketball stadium near campus to express his feelings of missing him. While feeling sad, he admits to wanting Anthony to come back into his life before he leaves the stadium, and finally, the banner moves by itself. After seeing the unsatisfactory training results of the players, the coach warns that if they don't win the next game, they will be out of the basketball league, which makes Kenny feel upset by throwing his ball upward. But when the ball collector comes to get the ball, strangely, the ball doesn't fall, feeling that the ball has disappeared somewhere. One day in a game, Kenny starts to hear voices as if someone is whispering to him, and when his movement is blocked, suddenly the ball passes by itself to one of his friends, so finally he successfully makes a three-point shot. The strange incident happens again to the opposing team, with the ball that has already gone into the net, but the ball doesn't actually go in, which makes everyone feel that their vision is wrong. When Kenny's team is threatened with elimination at critical moments, Kenny quickly passes the ball to one of his friends, but miraculously, the ball flies by itself into the net, and finally, Kenny's team wins the game. Kenny is then interviewed by a TV reporter, and when he gives his answer, he sees the hair of one of the reporters moving by itself, and finally, he is shocked. When he is alone in the locker room, he hears the whispering voices again until he becomes curious about the sound of water coming out by itself in the shower. Miraculously, something glowing appears there, which turns out to be Anthony, who has come back to life. This makes Kenny scared, and he continues to be scared, but Anthony admits he has no intention of scaring him. But Kenny doesn't believe it by punching him, and Anthony's face becomes distorted, which indicates that his body cannot be touched. So Anthony convinces him with words that their father once said, that if the two of them stay united, anything can happen in a basketball game. After being able to feel Anthony's hand, Kenny starts to believe in Anthony's presence, so he wants to tell his mother this. But Anthony says that their mother or other people cannot see his presence, and only Kenny can see him, because Anthony has become a ghost. He adds that they have a goal to win the basketball league trophy, so he will help his brother get it. When the coach is talking before the game, Anthony appears and also talks to Kenny with a question, so he answers it, which makes his friends wonder about Kenny talking to himself. But Anthony doesn't stop there and starts joking with his brother with all the abilities he has. After the game starts, Anthony starts helping Kenny's team in every way, from helping one of his friends score points, blocking the opponent's movement, to blocking the ball thrown by the opposing team into the net. Feeling amazed by the way Kenny's friend shoots the ball, the commentators watch the recording again and don't realize that it's the ghost's doing. Even the referee blames one of the opposing players who fell because of Anthony, considering it a fake foul or diving. Because Kenny's team score is slightly behind the opposing team and time is running out, Anthony intensifies his help until finally. As a result, Kenny's team manages to win the game, and finally, all his friends celebrate this great victory. Kenny then hugs Anthony while screaming, which makes all his friends wonder about Kenny acting like a crazy person. So he tries to make a reasonable excuse for what he did. In his free time, Kenny sees his crush RC, who is alone, so he checks his breath first before approaching his crush. Kenny then asks RC out on a date, which she agrees to, but suddenly Anthony comes and interrupts Kenny's moment. Not just in games, Anthony also bothers Kenny outside of games, which starts to make RC wonder about Kenny talking to himself. Because he feels disturbed, Kenny decides to leave RC and tells Anthony not to get close to RC again. This is because RC is a reporter, and she can tell many people if she finds out that Anthony has helped Kenny's team to win. But he feels that RC is a good person, so the two of them argue until Kenny is thrown into the basketball stadium. There are Kenny's friends who are playing basketball, and they see Kenny acting like a crazy person. They can't believe it when Kenny is slammed around by Anthony, but the other friends obviously cannot see Anthony, so they feel that Kenny cannot do that. After fighting in Bruce Lee style, Kenny's friends start asking what's wrong with him, and they threaten to report Kenny to their coach. So Kenny reveals that this is because of Anthony, which of course his friends don't believe. So Kenny tells Anthony to tell them, which of course he cannot do, while the other friends become more convinced that Kenny has gone crazy. As a result, Kenny is caught having his mental state checked, but he asks Anthony to prove to his friends that he is not crazy, and finally, Anthony agrees to help. Kenny then tells his shortest friend to shoot the ball by holding the rim. So he starts to do it. Then Anthony helps the friend to fly, and finally he succeeds. But the other friends still don't believe it. So Anthony immediately shows his supernatural abilities, and finally, all his friends believe. In the next game, RC comes as usual to watch the game, where she likes to sit with her colleague, Mikulski. After kicking out one of Media's friends, Mikulski talks to RC privately and suspects that something is wrong with Kenny's team with the way they win games, especially with Kenny himself. So he tells RC to report anything wrong if it's found, so that their media becomes more established among the public. After the game has been going on for some time, there's an opposing player who mocks Kenny about Anthony, which of course makes Kenny unhappy. Anthony hears this, so he pranks the opposing player by possessing him, then throwing the ball until it bounces away, and making him laugh by himself like a crazy person. Not only that, Anthony enters the ball to scare the opposing player, and tells him not to mess with Kenny anymore, or else he will be finished. After winning the game, Anthony invites Kenny to visit his grave, but he wants to go on a date with his crush, which makes Anthony upset. Finally, the romantic moment is increasingly felt by Kenny and RC when having dinner at a nice restaurant, where, of course, Anthony becomes a nuisance again for Kenny and disturbs his moment with RC. But fortunately, RC still feels happy to go on a date with Kenny, and right before they exchange kisses, Anthony comes again to disturb the moment he's been waiting for all this time. In the next game, one of Kenny's friends is possessed by Anthony and accidentally pushes one of the opposing players before he shoots the ball. So the referee considers it a foul, and finally, he's replaced with another player, which makes him upset with Anthony. Kenny knows that his friend is possessed by Anthony, so he apologizes, but his friend asks Kenny to tell Anthony not to get close to him again. After Anthony appears, Kenny says that he has gone too far, but he doesn't really care because soon he will be able to experience what it's like to be in the Final Four tournament. On one occasion with Kenny, their mother says that when she watches Kenny play, she feels that Anthony is also there. This makes her miss Anthony by hugging Kenny, but unfortunately, Anthony cannot join hugging them because he's become a ghost. The next day, RC is seen making an article about yesterday's game while watching the footage, and when receiving a call from Mikulski, she sees something bluish when Kenny's friend jumps to shoot the ball. She looks again more carefully this time, and finally realizes that the friend is not holding the ball, but rather the bluish color is helping him to shoot the ball. The next recording is a recording when the friend is upset with Kenny, and from what the friend says about Anthony. Finally, RC learns that Anthony has appeared as a ghost to help Kenny's team. At night, Kenny's friends come to talk about Anthony, where they reveal that they no longer want to be helped by Anthony because they feel this is wrong, so they want Anthony not to play with them anymore. This is, of course, protested by Anthony, and finally, he becomes very angry. After calming down some time later, Anthony reveals that he actually doesn't want to move on yet because he still has a goal to win the basketball tournament with his friends. He adds that if Kenny wants him to leave, Kenny just has to say it, and Anthony will disappear. Feeling bad about it, Kenny decides to allow Anthony to stay with his friends until they win the tournament because he himself wants that. On game day, Kenny meets with RC to talk about Anthony. But before he can talk further, he has to go for a meeting with his friends. So he asks RC to trust him about Anthony. This makes RC hesitant to report her investigation results about Anthony. So when she meets with Mikulski, who is already with 2 people from bigger media, she decides not to tell about Anthony. And finally, her investigation results are thrown into the trash. Before the game starts, there is someone from the opposing team who is Kenny's friend, who expresses his condolences for Anthony's passing. But when the game starts, Anthony sees the friend who turns out to be skilled and brings his team to lead temporarily, but he himself has been told not to interfere with the game by Kenny and the others. But because he feels upset, he decides to disturb the friend while shooting the ball, and finally, he makes the friend get injured. In the end, Kenny's team wins, but this makes Kenny upset with Anthony's actions, so he has to accompany his good friend, who is being treated at the hospital. When alone with Anthony, Kenny realizes that all these victories are thanks to Anthony, but he also realizes that all his actions are a form of cheating. So he again asks Anthony not to interfere with the game. Anthony warns that without his help, Kenny's team will lose, to which Kenny replies that his team will accept defeat if that's the case, and finally, Anthony becomes angry. Finally, the time comes for the final game, where Kenny's team tries their best to win the game, but in the end, they struggle to lead the score. During halftime, all the friends are angry, so Kenny motivates his friends by bringing up Anthony's name, reminding them of how they once played with him in the past with full spirit. As a result, their game becomes better, and they can catch up with points from the opposing team. During a break on the sideline, the coach tells Kenny to shoot the ball, which reminds him of his father, who once said the same thing. So after the game starts again, and when Kenny gets his moment to shoot the ball, he sees Anthony, who appears and wants to help put the ball into the net. But Kenny tells him not to help. Then Anthony disappears, and finally the ball goes into the net. Finally, Kenny's team manages to win the final game, and Kenny screams as loud as he can. He then sees Anthony walking away from the court and going towards the light that has been waiting for him. So Kenny approaches him, which makes Anthony feel proud of the team and his brother's success. Now, Anthony has been called by them, and they want Anthony to play with their team. After a final goodbye, Anthony walks into the light, and finally he moves on. The coach considers Anthony as their 6th player, which Kenny confirms, and finally, he celebrates his victory with many people.